Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Teaching Artist Talks, Arts and Corrections. We're just going to take a brief moment to let folks join the session, and then we're going to dive right in. All right. Just a quick heads up for everyone attending today's webinar, letting you know that it is going to be recorded. We are incredibly thrilled to be highlighting the impact of the arts and corrections this afternoon. And while we recognize that this session cannot fully capture all perspectives and experiences on this very nuanced topic, we do, however, hope that today's discussion will offer valuable insights for those curious about integrating the arts into these settings, as well as providing a deeper understanding for teaching artists who may already be engaged in this practice. My name is Lo Bruner, and I am the Arts Engagement Coordinator with the Virginia Commission for the Arts, and I'm joined today by my neighboring colleague.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lizzie Morales. I am the Arts and Education Program Director with the Maryland State Arts Council.
Thanks, Lizzie. So today's webinar session is presented by the Mid-Atlantic Arts Education Managers Working Group and our partners at NASA. In addition to Virginia and Maryland, the Arts Ed Manager Working Group is a collaboration between several state arts agencies in the Mid-Atlantic region, which include the Delaware Division of the Arts, New Jersey State Council on the Arts, New York Council of the Arts, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, Virgin Island Council on the Arts, and the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History. We're so delighted that everyone is able to join us today.
And before we get started, just take a moment to familiarize yourself with the Zoom webinar platform. There are auto captions available, which you can access by clicking on the Show Captions button on the bottom of the screen in Zoom console. In the Zoom webinar format, the audience will be able to see and hear presenters, but you will not be able to see your fellow audience members. However, we do invite you to engage in the chat for themes and ideas that are coming out for you during today's webinar.
Next, we're going to invite Tiffany Richardson from Sound Impact to lead us through a short visualization activity. We'll also be hearing more from Tiffany later on in today's panel discussion as well. So now I turn it over to Tiffany.
Close your eyes. Pause for a moment and take a deep breath. Imagine yourself stepping into a place where the air feels heavy with stories untold and often misunderstood. This is a space where time moves differently, a place where hope and hurt live side by side. As you walk through the locked gates, you move further from your own reality and freedom. You hear keys jingling and the sound of heavy metal doors slamming behind you. A sound that echoes more than just a barrier. It's a reminder of boundaries, safety, and vulnerability all at once. You notice the muted color of the walls and feel your own footsteps, each one reminding you to tread gently. The sterile scent of the air contrasts with the warmth of the faces you see. Young people, navigating complex circumstances and emotions. Your eyes meet theirs with humility and care. There's a quiet curiosity, perhaps even skepticism, but also a flicker of something more, a desire to be seen and heard. Each moment here matters. It's not just about being present. It's about bringing kindness and understanding into a space where trust can feel fragile and fickle. In this moment, you carry a purpose, not to fix, but to connect. Let the power of music open doors to healing, expression, and possibility.
Thank you, Tiffany, for that powerful way to get us started this afternoon. So now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Daizha Brown, who is the policy analyst with the Arts Education Partnership. And in her role, Daizha provides relevant information on arts education policy and other education policy topics for education leaders across the country. I'd like to invite Daizha to turn on her camera and share more about her work in arts education and in the juvenile justice system. Thank you, Daizha.
Thank you for that introduction, Lizzie. I'm super excited to be here with you all today. I got started in this work earlier this year, and this has been one of my topics of focus this year. So without further ado, let's just jump into today's discussion. For those of you who may not be familiar with AEP, nearly 30 years ago, the U.S. Department of Education and the National Endowment for the Arts came together with the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies and the Council of Chief State School Officers to create the Arts Education Partnership. For short, we say AEP. With the goal of promoting and ensuring that all students across this country have access to an excellent arts education. And so through research, reporting, counseling, and convening, we are able to connect partners who are passionate about arts learning to the knowledge and the people that help them do great things. The Arts Education Partnership believes that arts education leaders do better work when they're connected to powerful information and resources. And we know that well-informed leaders are crucial to ensuring that learners have access to an excellent arts education. And we take pride in the role that we continue to play in making this happen. You can move along, Will. Thank you. So AAP continues to be supported by the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Department of Education, and we are currently administered by the Education Commission of the States. You could go ahead. Thank you. So on the screen here are some of AEP's most utilized resources. So one of our longest standing resources is our Arts Ed Search resource, which is a searchable and filterable database of over 300 studies related to arts education. This is especially useful for researchers, policymakers, administrators, teachers. Users can filter their search by student outcomes, whether that's cognitive or academic outcomes, by educator outcomes, by age, type of resource. There's multiple filters that you can utilize on this resource. We also have the Arts Ed Digest, which is AAP's bi-monthly newsletter highlighting news from AAP partners and organizations. This includes reports, research, and job opportunities. We really do try to share things for all different role groups, whether you're a policymaker, a researcher, an artist, even a teaching artist. We also have our ArtScan resource, which I lead. It is a comprehensive arts education policy database that includes 13 different policy areas across all 50 states, DC, and the Department of Defense education activity. And lastly, we have our Arts Ed Amplified, which is AAP's blog, where we share successful stories in the field, We share policy information, event information. We do a lot of outreach, and we also highlight different practices and research in the field as well. Our blog is relevant to arts ed leaders across sectors and filterable by category, author, and also date released. You can move along, Will. Thank you. So for context, every year we work with our federal partners to identify our focus areas in which we design our work around. And as I mentioned earlier, this year, one of our focus areas was exploring arts and juvenile justice. And I took the lead on this work this year. And so one of our most recent resources is one that I curated called Creative Pathways, Arts Education, and Juvenile Justice Systems. This resource provides program examples, policy information related to arts education across the juvenile justice spectrum, and much more. My favorite piece of this resource is that we highlight artwork made by students involved in the justice system, which was very important for me to incorporate in this type of resource. There is visual art you can view from students involved in the Youth Art Unlocked program at the Genesee County Juvenile Justice Center in Flint, Michigan. And you can also view a cover of All of Me by John Legend that incorporates the guitar recorded by an Austin classical guitar student at the Gardner Betts Juvenile Justice Center in Austin, Texas. My goal here for today is to cover what arts and juvenile justice looks like from a system level, covering different points of entry for arts education within this ecosystem, the challenges of this work, and also covering relevant policy considerations that will then lead us into a conversation with our panelists who engage in more direct service work with youth involved in the justice system. So look forward to that later here in just a bit. You can move along, Lo. So as you engage in this work, I think it is really important to acknowledge the two different positions of thought in this space. One, we have abolitionists that believe that the juvenile justice, system should be eradicated, while reformists advocate for change within the current system to improve it. We do not take a stand with either position, but we do believe that the arts fit within both perspectives. So with this, there is a wide spectrum of arts-based services for youth involved in the justice system. In our Creative Pathways resource, we highlight the 4 points in which the arts can be integrated to support these youth. And so early on, we have our preventative programs. Preventative programs can help to reduce risk factors that increase delinquent behaviors. Risk factors refer to certain personality traits, environmental conditions, family conditions, and school conditions that are associated with delinquent behaviors. Preventative programs that incorporate arts-based activities help children develop and strengthen their cognitive, regulatory, and social and emotional skills that can positively influence their academic and future workforce trajectory. As you all may know, there are multiple points of intervention within the juvenile justice process to integrate arts programming, including during initial contact through those preventative programs, but also during correctional placement and during reentry as well. So we see that direct arts-based intervention programs within facilities often have tremendous positive impacts on youth. These are types of programs whose overall goal is to reduce recidivism through creative practices, often led by teaching artists, that allow youth to really grow and discover future possibilities for themselves. And we will dive into, the intricacies of different direct intervention programs within facilities in just a bit. And we also have transitional programs. So transitional programs provide youth with support services as they re-enter society from out-of-home placements. Arts-based transitional programs involve collaboration among placement facilities, including correctional institutions, schools, families, and communities to provide arts activities that assist youth development for a successful transition. You'll hear from our panelists in just a bit about how these efforts look in action. And lastly, it is no secret that there are great traumas associated with involvement in the justice system. Some imposed on youth during their time within facilities, and many traumas imposed on youth even before and after involvement in the justice system. And arts-based healing programs address these traumas and help youth build resilience, strengthen their coping skills, and foster positive self-esteem through different modes of art therapy. These programs provide trauma-informed supports that allow youth opportunities for self-expression and reflection in safe environments. And you can move along, Glo. Thank you. So taking into consideration the different programs within this ecosystem, there are a variety of role groups who influence the creation, planning, and implementation of arts-based services for youth involved in the system. So I want to acknowledge quickly that here on the graphic, this graphic was released a few years ago, and since then, the Arts for Incarcerated Youth Network has changed their name to Arts for Healing and Justice Network. So I just wanted to name that. But I will give you all a moment to look this graphic over, and then we'll jump into it. So on the screen, you can see that stakeholders span juvenile justice, the arts, education, and wraparound support spaces across federal, state, and local levels, right? So I want you all to see that youth are intentionally placed in the center of this graphic to symbolize that across stakeholder groups in this ecosystem, youth remain at the receiving end of efforts and should always be considered in decision-making and development processes. There are also stakeholder groups that span these areas, including grant makers. This graphic can be found on our Creative Pathways resource if you are interested in getting that. I do want to name specifically that there are stakeholders who are often omitted from decision-making conversations, including youth who are justice involved, families and guardians, educators in the classroom, and teaching artists, and community representatives, such as credible messengers, to name just a few. And this is important because better policymaking can occur when these stakeholders are engaged. They are the people with direct experience and insight to best understand the needs, successes, and potential opportunities of programs. So I invite you to take a closer look to identify those who are currently in your networks and those who you may seek to engage with in service of this work. And consider how you can align your work with youth at the center always. You can move along, Glo. Thank you. All right, so I wanted to also talk through some of the challenges that have presented themselves within this ecosystem and in providing youth involved in the system with arts programming. So one of these challenges is obviously access. So access to the arts is challenging in and of itself across the education system, but when considering these programs for justice-involved youth, the issue is only exacerbated. Access to programs is often limited and undervalued, and access to teaching artists in this space is limited as well. Another challenge is length of engagement. For many youth, especially in out-of-home placements, arts programming is often some of the only times, in a lot of instances, the only time that youth get to engage in meaningful activities outside of their dorms or cells. These engagements are not always allotted the full time that they require, or they're even cut short for reasoning that's not always clear. Some programs may only enter a facility for a month and then no longer be offered due to funding limitations, or the priorities among the facility has changed, for example. So access in the community is only an extension of this. So upon re-entering society after incarceration, arts programming is not typically offered to supplement re-entry supports and can be difficult for youth to navigate with no guidance. Another challenge is around data. So data collection and sharing in this space, especially across sectors, is usually very limited as well. This can make it difficult for stakeholders to collaborate and provide arts programming. And data limitations can also cause a disruption in access, because if a young person is transferred to a new facility, for example, from one that was offering arts programming, teaching artists cannot access that youth's information during transitions and cannot ensure the transfer of art services either. Another challenge here in this space is around administrative support and priorities, right? So as I mentioned before, providing arts programming is not always supported or made a priority by administrators in schools and in facilities. And navigating this ecosystem with little support from key decision makers is very difficult. Another challenge is around accommodating to these youth, right? There are already so many negative stereotypes attached to youth involved in the justice system, which makes facilities a lot of times less inclined to accommodate to youth needs outside of basic instruction that they are required to receive through state statute and code. And finally, I'd like to name that, collaborating across sectors and across stakeholders who have influence over youth involved in the system is very complex. We have different role groups who envision different types of supports for youth, and it could be very challenging to coming to a mutual consensus around arts-based programming efforts. You can move along, Will. So to combat these challenges, the leaders we identified at the local, state, and federal level can collaborate around specific policies to expand arts education within the justice system. So let's get into some of these policy considerations. You could go ahead, though. Thank you. So we know that relationship building among correctional owners, staff, and the folks and organizations in the community offering arts programming is key to exploring direct arts education intervention programs, which we talked about earlier. And there are ways to organize meaningful collaborations across stakeholder groups. This collaboration might be formalized through a task force or advisory network, typically created by governors, legislatures, chief state school officers, state boards of education, and even post-secondary boards. Grant makers can be very important members of these groups as well. And so task forces are often created to formalize partnerships and supplement primary policymaking channels by creating a space for a broad range of stakeholders to study topics in a more focused way. And so this may lead to greater buy-in of task force recommendations and may prompt further action from policymakers. I'll highlight an example here. So a few years ago, the Maine Juvenile Justice System Assessment and Reinvestment Task Force was created to establish a continuum of community-based alternatives to incarceration for youth in Maine. And this task force eventually released recommendations for stakeholders to consider in this space. Another way to collaborate is by implementing data sharing policies, which I touched on in that challenge, slide. So policies around data collection and reporting are often guided at the agency level. And when these don't align across agencies, it could create barriers to collaboration. So different policies can either prevent sharing of data outside of the agency, or it can be inconsistently collected and then reported on and can't be used for a variety of purposes. This can also limit program evaluation and may be something to keep in mind when considering reporting requirements for these types of programs. So policy can be implemented to support and protect cross-sector data sharing so that agencies and the individuals involved have access to the best available information to support you through prevention, intervention, transition, and healing. You can move along, Glo. All right. Another policy consideration is around aligning policy and funding. Federal and state resources prioritize the bulk of education funding to state-run facilities, but this funding is not specific to the arts. Additionally, funding is often tied to facilities rather than young people. And so when youth move out or across facilities, they often lose access to programming or resources. Policy and funding can be aligned to support these arts-based programs. And one way of doing this is by amending ESSA plans to include arts programming specifically under Title I, Part D, which is prevention and intervention programs for children and youth who are neglected, delinquent, or at risk. Title I, Part D funds can also be used to support prevention and transition programs that we talked about earlier. Funding streams can also be articulated through legislation, right? So in 2019, for example, Louisiana passed legislation that states that arts-based programming may be established within juvenile detention facilities and articulates the different ways that these programs can be funded, included by state appropriations, cooperative agreements, or even by grants. And finally, policymakers and grant makers alike can clearly define what evidence-based means and share this across funders. These definitions can help secure funds for these types of programs and evaluations. You can move along, Glo. All right. So arts requirements can be an important part of sustaining programs and can be implemented through policy as well. While most states have arts requirements for arts education in public schools, these requirements may not apply to detention facilities, depending on whether or not decisions related to the programmings are made at the facility level by the state or by the education agency. And so Nevada, for example, state statute says that a child who has not previously been adjudicated delinquent or in need of supervision and the unlawful act committed by the delinquent child did not involve the use or threatened use of force or violence against a victim can be ordered by the juvenile court to complete an alternative arts program. And so Nevada is actually one of the only states we have identified that includes some form of arts requirements for students in detention facilities. But like I mentioned, facilities and districts can also set these requirements for youth. But even before the arts can be included as an instructional requirement, safety and security procedures need to be considered to ensure that they don't prevent access to the arts through banned materials or restricted access to educators, including those educators who have a personal history with the justice system, excuse me. And lastly, well-intended decision makers and funders often offer one-time only arts-based activities and efforts to expand access. But the concern here is that these one-time only or limited arts-based events offered in juvenile detention facilities may frame the arts as a reward to earn rather than a core part of their education. So arts requirements can help ensure access isn't withheld as a reward that must be earned. All right, you can move along, Lo. All right, so I know this was a lot of information to consume in a little amount of time, but my hope is that this information better helps you understand arts in the justice ecosystem, the challenges that exist in this space, and ways to combat these challenges through policy considerations. This information will assist you as we transition into a deeper conversation around this topic with our panelists. But here on the screen is my contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions related to arts in the juvenile justice system. I'd be happy to connect with you. And please be sure to follow us on social media as well, to just keep up to date with what we have going on throughout the year at AAP. So at this time, I'm going to hand things off back to Lizzie to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. But thank you all so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation here shortly.
Yeah, thank you, Daizha, for sharing all of this information. And please check out the chat box for a lot of really helpful links that Daizha was sharing during her presentation. So feel free to see some more information there on how to look at their website and some of those wonderful resources that AAP put together. So next, we're going to introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists with us today, and they each have approximately 5 minutes to share a little bit about themselves and how they got into this work. After each panelist introduces themselves, we'll bring Daizha Brown back on camera to facilitate a conversation with all of the panelists regarding their work in arts and corrections. So please stick around for that conversation. So first, I'd like to invite Karine Karuga to turn on her camera and share with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Karine Quiroga, and I'm a visual artist. And throughout my short presentation, you will see images from work that was created in the facilities, and I will point out some more in specifics as I go on. So in some ways, my journey that led me to this point in my artistic career may have started with my dad not wanting me to study fine arts and me relenting to complete a degree majoring in criminology and psychology. I did eventually study fine art, and it cemented my determination to be an artist in my own terms. And shortly after arriving in the United States, very serendipitously, I met the director of Project Youth Outreach, Artivate, and they did work in youth facilities throughout the state of Maryland. So I did my first project working at a youth facility in Baltimore, the Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center, in 2007. And shortly after that, I started working at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility in the Crisis Intervention Unit, and then also with the Women's Unit. I am on the Maryland State Arts Council roster. Grateful for that because that provides opportunities and funding for some of the projects that I do in the facilities, both with organizations and as an individual artist. I've also, through time, worked with justice involved and justice adjacent youth art organizations. I worked with Arts on the Block, where I did mosaic mural projects that allowed me to work with gang involved youth. And then also the Choice program at UMBC, where they are court involved youth and oftentimes do their community service with the Choice program. I am also currently working at the Howard County Detention Center, where I'm doing a mural arts program, and I also have a knitting program that is funded through a creativity grant from the Maryland State Arts Council. And then I have the good fortune to work with my teaching partner, who I founded Solidarity Arts with, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, where we are teaching a class, co-teaching a class in creative writing and in visual art for the special management unit. And then during COVID, we started, because all of the programs shut down, we started doing distance learning programs, starting at the Maryland Institute for Women. Go to the next slide. So motivation and inspiration, I think going to arts and correction conferences in my early days and meeting people working in facilities and seeing the incredible work that they do really motivated me to go beyond just working with the organizations that I work with, but also started applying for my own grants to do my own work in carceral spaces. Secondly, creative expression is a human right. Artistic freedom of expression is not just a privilege, it's recognized as a human right. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declared the right of freedom of opinion and expression, which includes the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media. Incarceration strips people of many rights. However, providing opportunities for artistic expression underscores their humanity. And then whether painting a collaborative mural, artistically expressing ideas on paper, or knitting a baby hat, engaging in creative activities can provoke profound emotions, provide comfort when words fail, and sparks dialogue. It creates connections with others and the opportunity for self-discovery. Probably the single most motivating factor is the artists and creatives that participate in my classes and workshops. Their willingness to be vulnerable and take creative risks, and their openness to express themselves visually constantly inspires me. Their commitment to learning new skills and their bravery to create despite their circumstances deeply motivates me. And then finally, collaboration and community. As I said earlier, I have the good fortune to have a partner that worked with me. We founded Solidarity Arts, that came out of collaborating during the pandemic on providing distance learning packets to facilities throughout Maryland, and then also teaching together. It is really inspiring and motivating to have someone to bounce ideas off and to plan together and collaborate, and that really supports my teaching practice. Can you go to the next slide, please? Having a trauma-informed teaching practice is at the core of teaching in the carceral spaces. It involves creating an environment that allows participants to feel safe to express themselves authentically without judgments, and to build trust that it's clear expectations and boundaries. There's also guiding and receiving feedback, and actively listening to others creates an empathetic and respectful environment where the artist can share their work freely. One of the things that's very important is having consistently showing up, having routines and having structures. And examples of that is having opening and closing circles, opportunities to share. Mindfulness practices are key. It sets the tone, and listening to music, having visualization exercises like we did in the beginning is really helpful in creating these safe spaces. Choice-based instruction is empowering to the artist. Incarcerated artists have very little choice and agency. Giving the participants the opportunity to freely choose how to and with what materials to create is very liberating. Taking the temperature, that happens from walking into the facility to start teaching. The staff at the facilities are there, and their role is safety and security. And we don't know what we step into. So always kind of feel what it feels like as you walk into the facility. What are the offices like? Is there a certain feel to it? And then also with the participants, we don't know what happened just before they step into our classrooms. So creating an environment where you can just walk in and kind of just feel what is happening, and the willingness as a teaching artist to stop and say, maybe let's abandon everything. Something happened just before the class started. Let's reevaluate and redirect. We can go to the next slide, please. So what you're looking at now are just some examples of work created. The top left one is with the Choice program at UMBC. It's installed at the Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center. And some of the youth who participated in the program actually attended court in the Justice Center. And some of them even expressed the fact that they could show their art to their judges, how impactful that was. The bottom one is at the Victor Cullen Center. It's painted in their cafeteria, and something to point out is that The youth always participate in the planning and the whole process of creating the artworks. They have input at every stage and make choices at every stage of the creation process. The one on the right is created by young girls at the Noise Children's Center. And again, one of the ways that I allow them to feel ownership in the artwork. Everyone creates a small piece that gets incorporated into the work. And then also they participate entirely in the design of the work and make choices about color and placement of elements. So it's a very empowering experience. Final slide, please. The one at the top is, we just completed it. It's at the Howard County Detention Center, and I worked with 5 men who depict in this particular mural their incarceration experience. And you can see the ship sailing through turbulent waters towards a tree and its waves. It goes entirely around a room. There's some flowers symbolic of their growth and change as artists. And what you don't can quite see, but on the outside is a lighthouse, and the ship sails toward the lighthouse, which is symbolic of their own success and just surviving through the turbulent times of incarceration. Bottom left is a, we, again, grateful to the Maryland State Arts Council. We started a knitting program where we all contributed small little pieces of blankets, pieces of knitted squares that get sewn into baby blankets that we sent to a facility that will give it to needy mothers. And then on the right is as an example of some work done on the crisis intervention unit at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. That's my most long-standing engagement, working with the men on this particular unit. And they, the only time they come out of their unit is when they come to the arts program. So it's a program that I'm very passionate about and very fortunate to have my teaching partner, Leslie Bumstead, who I'm going to call on next to switch on her slide. She's joined me there most recently to start a writing class combined with a visual arts class. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And Leslie, if you could switch on your video and your...
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Karine. And thank you, everybody who's here today. I'm really happy to be part of this. I'm Leslie Bumstead, and I'm a poet and an educator. And as Karine was mentioning, we co-founded Solidarity Arts together. I'm also a teaching artist on the Maryland State Arts Council roster, for which I am very grateful. And I have been teaching creative writing in prison since 2014. So below is a list of the facilities I have worked at. I'm currently at Maryland Correctional Institution in Jessup, otherwise known as MCIJ. And as Karine mentioned, co-teaching a class with her at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility. So I've been teaching for about 10 years, and I think Karine already mentioned the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, where we did the correspondence program during the COVID lockdown. So I didn't teach in person there, but we would drive up the curriculum and drop it off at the facility, everybody in, full gowns and masks. And then we would pick up outgoing work and provide feedback, and then bring it back into the facility. And that went on for, I think, about 6 months. And then for a couple of years after that in various facilities all over Maryland. Next slide, please. So that is actually a picture of the facility that I work at, MCIJ. I don't think I'm supposed to do that, but I was leaving and I saw those geese crossing the little street, and there's a guard tower on the left that I don't even think is used. But so I sneaked in that picture. I had no connection to the carceral system except for my work as an investigator for the Public Defender Service in DC when I was 19 years old. And my job involved frequent visits to prisons and jails. And I saw clients and families deeply damaged by the criminal justice system. Later, I had a mentor who talked enthusiastically about her experience teaching creative writing workshops in prisons out west, and that always stuck with me. So about 11 years ago, I decided to look into teaching creative writing in prison, and I searched online for organizations with prison writing programs in Maryland, but I couldn't find any. And I now know that there were a few, but perhaps my Google search terms weren't quite right. And in any case, I eventually found an email address for the volunteer services director of Maryland State Prisons, and I emailed her. And she sent my class proposal and resume to the facilities in my geographical area, and a sergeant at MCIJ responded. So once I had done the paperwork, my class began. And I'm telling this story because I feel like sometimes you just have to create your own program. And it seems a little scary and unconventional to just cold call the prison system and say, hey, I'm a creative writing teacher. Do you need any creative writing classes? But in my case, it worked out. And, now I've been there for 10 years. Next slide, please. So I call it the perfect storm. It's very simple. I love writing, I love teaching, and I love working with marginalized groups. So I did this work as a volunteer for about 5 years, showing up every Monday morning at MCIJ. And I was eventually able to go from volunteer to paid work through collaborations with organizations and grants from the Maryland State Arts Council, for example. I didn't have any experience teaching inside a prison. It was truly trial by fire, and I learned as I went, and I did make a lot of mistakes, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. So as Karine was mentioning, like having somebody to run things by, and someone who's done this kind of work to ask questions and get an idea what kind of things you're dealing with when you go into a facility, because there are a lot of details that you just can't know until you've done it. But I did not tend to have any difficulties with the participants themselves. I saw right away that it was important to establish two things: respect and trust. And the respect has always been easy. The minute the participants see that I respect them, they treat me with respect right back. And then trust is relative, but in this case, it means that I do what I say I'm going to do. And that involves showing up every week. As Karine was mentioning, consistency is so important. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a class that I have done. And I start with a warm-up exercise that's low stakes. It's fun. It could be whimsical. Participants often come in feeling angry or depressed. They miss their loved ones. They're not in a great mood. And so introducing a topic like this, I heard about the robot, just invites imagination to kind of help them shift gears. And this prompt in particular always goes over very well. I get responses that range from, a short science fiction story to a letter home. The participants are so creative, and they really enjoy this kind of thought exercise. And then this prompt comes from a creative nonfiction writer and teacher, Dinty Moore. It's called Just Add Water, because he's talking about those little dinosaurs that you can plop into water, and then it's like a little tiny sponge, and then it grows into a dinosaur. And this kind of prompt is intended particularly for people who might be intimidated by the idea of writing an essay or writing about themselves in a general way. And when you break it down in this way, they've done it before they even realize they've done it. So I give them index cards, and on each one, they write these 4 things: 30 nouns, something someone said to you a lot when you were young, a smell from your past, and then describe a part of someone that you love. And I noticed that number 4 is often about their moms. So then they read what they've written, and they share and give feedback to each other. I'm not going to read this one in the interest of time, but then sometimes I take them and type them up for them so they can see what it looks like on a piece of paper. All right, next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and I just wanted to quickly read. I'll just read the second poem, which is a response to the Langston Hughes poem Harlem, which begins with the line, "What happens to a dream deferred?" And so their assignment is to write kind of using that sort of question, and then using a lot of metaphors. And this participant was very intimidated by writing when the class first began, and this was towards the end. When the wind blows. What happens when the wind passes by? Does it disappear like the rabbit in the magician's hat, or does it return to the North Pole and chill like the ice cubes in the freezer? Does it swoop back to the south and hook up with the southern fried air and become the 100-mile-an-hour tornado that rips homes and dreams from their foundations? Maybe it becomes a summer breeze and spends the day at the beach. Or does it become Ira or Helen or Jane on the 5 o'clock news when we get the weather report about new hurricanes? No one really knows where the wind goes when the wind blows. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And it's passed on to Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here today to represent Sound Impact. I am a co-founder of the organization, co-artistic director, and teaching artist. Sound Impact was formed 11 years ago as a way to use music to empower young people beyond the concert hall. And we started doing that by working with young people in schools, international communities, and eventually juvenile detention centers. Our first performance in the Santa Cruz Juvenile Detention Center occurred in 2015, a performance during the holidays. We received a personal invitation from a friend of the organization, and that performance gave us the opportunity to connect with young people, be a part of their writing workshop, providing music in the background, and really see that this would become such an important part of our mission to bring arts into spaces where stories really needed to be told. So we started evolving the program, and which led to 3-day workshops and residencies, started in Northern California, so continued in Santa Cruz, California, Santa Clara, and San Francisco juvenile detention centers. Moved to Washington, D.C. in 2018 through work with the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, and moved to Virginia in 2023, thanks to some new grant funding and support from local funders and organizations like Virginia Commission for the Arts. And as a part of this work, we're all classically trained musicians in the Sound Impact world, but we've been working with vulnerable communities since the beginning. And so we have done a lot of research, speaking with other artists to learn how their programs work, learning about the communities by meeting with the people that teach the students in these facilities, talking with the staff, and of course, learning directly from the students as we do each program and building that out. We also have engaged in trauma-informed practices training and continue to do so. And we've worked with a neuroscientist to explore how music and movement support brain growth and social emotional wellness in young people. Next slide, please. So our programs are 3-day residencies, which we call Use Your Voice residencies. And the first day we are going in, performing, getting to know the young people, using music as the lead connector, using it as a mode for reflection, and then letting the young people create. And this is all geared at leading up to our final performance or presentation, which happens on day 3. Each Use Your Voice residency has a different theme or follows a different story, sometimes even perhaps a play or an opera. And the students get to really put their own voice forward in whatever we're creating, and everything is very much directed by their talents, their interests, and responsive to them on the spot. Next slide, please. So music is our primary mode because we're all musical artists first, but music unlocks the creativity alongside many different other modes. So we're using creative writing and storytelling and poetry, mindfulness and movement, melody and songwriting, and vocal and instrumental performance. And there's a different combination and recipe for every single residency, and seeing what talents and interests each group of students that we're working with bring. And in these workshops, we're typically working with 12 to 15 teens and performing for a larger group, but the intensive work is happening with that core group of students over the 3 days. Next slide, please. And collaboration is a huge part of what's making our programs really exciting right now. So collaborators that we get to bring in help us expand our artistic team and the genres we're able to present. It helps us meet the students with more diverse creative interests and lots of different genres. So Chris Timber's band is down here in the lower right corner. Their band came in and we did a 3-day songwriting workshop incorporating rock and folk music, blues, jazz, gospel type influences, where the students got to write their own songs. And our most recent collaboration, which we're excited will continue, is with the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center. They were presenting the opera Fidelio, which tells a story of a man that was falsely imprisoned, became a political prisoner. And we used this as the theme and center point for the residency. The students in Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center got to create their own version of Fidelio, adding their own spoken word, poetry, music, and performing as a part of the choir alongside some opera superstars, including Solomon Howard. And they got to put their own flow to this this very well-known opera and create their own version, which they dubbed Free Flow. And it was really exciting to see how they took an over 200-year-old opera and really modernized it and made it their own. And next slide, please. This is a part of the final presentation, the culminating performance. And what we're able to do is as a part of this, the students get to share their own stories, share their thoughts and feelings, gives them an opportunity to share what they've created with their peers, with staff, and sometimes teachers from the facility, and also family members and caregivers that are able to attend. So they get to practice public speaking, performing, and share something about themselves that they might not have known before. And obviously, their community might not have known about them. So it's really a privilege to be able to collaborate with the youth and see what they create as a part of these residencies. And as a part of this work, I'm very excited that we get to collaborate with the amazing team at the Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center. And I'm going to invite Michael Thigpen to come on and share more about his work.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's just a pleasure to be here today. I'll tell you a little bit about the work that I get to do and partner with people like Tiffany and Sound Impact. I've been working in juvenile justice for several years now, but I've also served as a former superintendent at 2 facilities, one in Indiana and one in Virginia. Over that time, I have always loved the arts and had been introduced to the arts in 3rd grade, singing in the choir, so nervous, and a kid who was very shy, but I really believe that the arts saved my life. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in an environment that was very crime infested, if you would. And there were so many decisions or so many paths that I could have taken, but the arts really freed me, gave me a path forward, gave me a voice to be able to communicate what I may have been feeling or experiencing. And so that has been so impactful for me. It led me to want to, at one time, go to Broadway, but then I felt led that it wasn't for me to be on the stage, but to create a stage for young people to be able to find their voice and to communicate their woes or hurts or life stories. And so it's to open the door for others. So I've been working with young people for over 30 years now. And it has been everything to me. It's meant the world to me to see lives transformed by stories, by singing, by dancing, by having these different visual art platforms to share with others their story, their destiny. So, in my time of working with young people, there has been passions or nuggets that have been created over this time. And so, I want to share some of those nuggets with you. While working with young people, there is a partnership that happens between the facility and artists who come in, and that is a partnership to create a safe and trusting environment, which was shared earlier. But I'm glad we're saying the same thing to make sure that not only do the young people feel safe, but the staff feel safe about the items we may be bringing into the facility, that the artists that are coming and feel safe in the environment that they're working in. And then out of that safety, there is so much trust that's given to each other that we're going to keep each other safe. But then also at the same time, young people feel like they're not being judged, that they know that they can share out of the reservoirs of their own life, their own stories, their hurts, and be able to receive a form of healing. The second thing that I find to be a very important nugget is to adapt the program to be very trauma informed. All of our kids have experienced trauma. Not only have our kids experienced trauma, but our staff, ourselves, we've all been through some form of trauma in our lives. And so being very cognizant that that is going on in the room and being able to identify when a moment happens, when we need to take those breaks, when we need to ask deeper questions, when we need to be able to say, hey, what are you feeling right now? What's happening right now? And then also structuring our programming that addresses it, that allows us to say, okay, hey, this might be triggering for a young person, so maybe we won't go down this path. Maybe we'll go a different way. Because after the art activity is over, there's a staff that's going to have to deal with whatever has been unearthed in that moment. So working together, partnering and saying, hey, I noticed this in a session with this young person. Maybe someone, a caseworker or case manager can dig deeper with that young person. Another nugget that I've seen over the years of working with young people in these type of settings is allowing that young person to have their own personal voice, their own agency in the moment, to be able to tell their story. We can create the stencil, if you would, but allowing them to pick up the colors, the paint or the crayons or the markers, whatever it is, to paint out and fill out their own story. Because we find so often that as young people are trying to develop and grow, there's so many walls that they hit and so many barriers that they hit. And to be able to give them a way to communicate those barriers is so important. And so I've seen some dynamic things happen when kids have the freedom or have the agency to share their own voice. These are the things that they talk about in their treatment team meetings and their family engagement sessions. These are the things when they say, oh, I got to write this poem, I got to sing this song, I got to dance to this song, I got to do this piece. And it just illuminates the moment and it gives them so much pride. It's nothing like to see a young person be so proud of their moment and we creating that moment for them. Another nugget that has been so important to me and something that I think is a challenge for us, but something that we really need to work towards is it's finding a way for there to be collaboration and long-term goals. One thing is to develop a kid's portfolio that, they're developing an art portfolio, they're developing a song portfolio, they're doing these things and have something to go with them, but also making those connections outside of the community, connecting them with community organizations, whether it's local arts programs, or it's their school, or it's their local church, making sure that they don't just drop off, because some of our young people, it is their voice, it becomes their escape, it becomes a place where they find their freedom. One thing I often say is that engaging youth in the arts can inspire change, shift emotions, reshape thoughts, and motivate actions. I truly believe that we are able to change the trajectory of a young person by giving them a tool as simple as an instrument, giving them a crayon, a paintbrush, giving them a song, or giving them a piece of material that they can shape into something that they want to. It's so important that we give access. So that's me, and I want to pass it on back to Lizzie to take us to our next level.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. So I'd like to invite all of our presenters to turn on their cameras for a panel discussion. And due to time, we're not going to have a formal Q&A period today, but please feel free to share your ideas and thoughts in the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you, Lizzie. I just want to jump into things. We're running a little low on time, so just to start us off, I really want to lean on Tiffany here with her focus in relationship building in this space, and in her work with residencies and things like that. How do you establish relevance and connection with participants? And who are the key partners in successful implementation of this work?
As we design each of our residencies, we're really thinking about what type of music is going to connect with the young people, creating an entry point from the very beginning. And it might be a piece of music, it might be a story or a theme. We have the current advantage of sort of working on a regular monthly basis with Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center. And so that helps us building those long-term relationships with the youth, but also, of course, with the staff. We were really lucky when we received a grant from Alexandria City back in 2023 to start this work in Virginia. And we met with Executive Director Janetha McNair, and she is so committed to making sure that the young people there have really incredible opportunities across the board, but very committed to the arts programming and making this accessible. And she introduced us to some of the other partners that the youth were working with as well. So we were able to learn about what they were doing with the other partners, bring that into the themes that we were covering in our residencies as well. So again, using music as a way to reinforce what they're getting in other areas. And we do student surveys and ask the staff before our residency too, what do they want to hear right now? And we do our best to constantly accommodate that, because then they can see that they're a part of the design process and really directing what's happening.
Absolutely. I think that cultural relevance piece is critical when dealing with youth. So I appreciate that and appreciate your input on that, Tiffany. Any of our other panelists want to chip in here? And also, how do you cultivate or maintain these relationships? Because a piece of it, is that maintaining these relationships as well. So what does that look like?
I can answer that a little bit. I have I guess, the privilege to have products that are visually appealing, that the staff on an ongoing basis walk past in the facility. So that creates a connection with the staff. Another thing is really like when we have mural dedications or showcases or anything, to invite the staff to those events. And furthermore, very often in the youth facilities, there will be a counselor or someone of the staff of the pod with the youth in the facility, in the workshop. And I've often invited them to participate with the youth, and that builds a connection with the staff, which just makes, we all have the same goal. is to engage the youth in positive activities. So having that relationship with the staff is key, and maintaining it in a cordial, friendly, and that's just one way of getting them, involved in what we do and showcasing what we do.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Kitty. And so we know, I spoke about some of the barriers in providing these types of arts programming. And so what barriers have you found in trying to provide arts programming in facilities, and how did you overcome these barriers? Michael, I wanna lean on you for this one.
Sure,
Your
sure,
experience.
sure. Sure. One of the biggest barriers is the mental barrier. Many people say, like, why do these kids deserve this? Why are we bringing people in? Why are we trying to do all these things for these kids? Well, these kids are the same kids that are at your community center, that are at your schools, that are in your homes. They made a decision, in one part of their life, but it should not isolate them or alienate them from the services that they so desperately need. So it's the mental barrier first that we have to get through. And then there are financial barriers that we have to fight against. So often we're underfunded in those areas. And so one thing that was really helpful for us is partnering with Sound Impact at our facility. As Tiffany said, our executive director is a strong advocate for youth. And I tell you, a pleasure to work for, because she will go to the end of the line to make sure that a youth has what they need in order to survive. And so collaborating with grants and us doing our part. Sometimes it's Sound Impact finding the grant, sometimes it's the facility finding the grant. But whatever we need to do to come together to make sure that these kids are not alienated from the services that they need and deserve.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think we overlook that, the mental aspect of things, and we have to truly start there, right? Leslie, I'm curious if you have anything to add here with your experience in bringing in programs and not really having that back end experience before coming into facilities.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that something that I hadn't thought about in a while, which is that I did not appreciate when I first started going in that I'm a security risk. And I just didn't think about that. I was like, I'm just some, writer who wants to teach a writing class. But no, I'm a problem. I'm a problem for everybody who works there. They can't trust me because they can't trust anybody coming in. And so that takes a lot to get used to. And depending on the facility, like they're also different. And one of the ones that I work at has had a lot of problems in terms of, things coming in and out. And so they're particularly careful about that. But the situation got so hostile at one point that there was an arts teacher who stopped coming. He just didn't want to deal with it anymore. And that was really heartbreaking. And to this day, they don't have a new art teacher. So I think things are different there, and they could, but I just wanted to bring that up because it's something, now that I'm used to it and I understand how it works, and I can be more respectful of what correctional officers have to deal with and all of that. I haven't thought about it lately, but it's important for anybody new going in.
I never thought of that. I'm glad you bring that up. And thank you for sharing. Karine, Tiffany, would you like to add anything here about some of the barriers you've may experience in providing arts programming? Tiffany, even through residencies.
Karine, you unmuted.
I can go ahead. I think just something to point out, and piggybacking on what Leslie said, barriers, art supplies, because, we coming in, you have this grand plan of, I'm going to do this project with this materials and everything. And then, thank goodness, I've had so much training and training from the facilities, from experts over the years, about the material that can come in and how to adapt to that. So it's like this constant game of being respectful and acknowledging the fact, that there's a reason why we can't bring in certain materials. But then I also think it creates new opportunities. You think about creating and making in a new and interesting way, inventive way. So art supplies for visual artists is always just a challenge, but some facilities are amazing in that they have ways of dealing with it in a different way, and it makes it easier.
Yeah. I think this is a good transition to our next question around, materials and having access to these materials to provide quality arts programming, right? So Tiffany, I want to lean on you a little bit here, and also Karine and Leslie. How do you prepare these lesson plans or activities for residencies in correctional facilities? And what are some key elements that are important to consider when creating these lesson plans?
I can just jump in first. In terms of the residencies, the 3-day residencies, why we're currently doing that plan and have been doing that for a few years is because if we went on a weekly basis, we may end up with different students every time. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is sequential and we're able to scaffold the lessons. So, and work towards something in the end. I think in like performing arts, the end product can teach us so much. And so for us, we don't have a lot of materials necessarily that we're bringing in, but we're bringing in tech equipment. And at some facilities, they have access to musical instruments, which is very exciting. So at Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center, not when we first started working there, but now they have an incredible music room where there are a lot of instruments that we have access to on most of our visits. And so the students are able to access those instruments, but that in other facilities, we've never had access to that. And that is a huge barrier. So we have to take into consideration, what do we need to bring as a small nonprofit in to help support the students where they are? And you're dealing with a multitude of different levels of history in the arts and kind of context. So that's something that we're thinking about.
I'll jump in here. I think one of the things that, again, helpful is Leslie and I planning together. And since we're doing visual art and creative writing together, is giving multiple entry points to our participants that they can, whatever the prompt is, they can make the choice and have agency over how they express themselves, whether they do it visually through creating visual art or writing. And I think it's very important to give them that opportunity when we plan. And I always think it's having plan A, B, C, D, and E ready to roll.
Absolutely. So with that, in talking about the different types of programs offered, what types of arts activities do you find students and facilities are drawn to? And I want to throw this question in here, y'all. I know we didn't discuss this, but I love this question by Emily in the chat. And also to extend off of that, what are some of the strongest socio-emotional benefits that you see from these programs? So we're going to kind of two-part it. And I'll lean on Leslie and Karine to lead this conversation, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that one because and this can sort of address both questions at the same time. One of the most important aspects of my program is giving feedback. And unlike high school students I teach, pretty much 100% of the participants in my classes want to share out loud what they've written. It's really remarkable. And then I like to create the atmosphere where we are giving encouraging feedback. What did you notice that you liked, or what stood out to you, and stuff like that. And I have to do very little modeling of that. They sort of got the memo already, and I see so much support that they have for one another. So I'll have a wide range of skill level, and somebody who feels a little less confident about his writing will be bolstered by everyone in the room. And they'll say, oh my gosh, look what you wrote. This is amazing. I love that. And they'll give him exactly what he needs. And so this, I think it creates this sense of safety in a place where, yeah, obviously there isn't a lot of that. And relationships are formed in those workshops that carry on outside of the workshop. And so to me, that's like just super rewarding. I love to see that.
Absolutely. And Michael, I know in your position, in really seeing that reentry and being involved in the reentry piece of this, where do you find students are really drawn to program wise, and some of the benefits that you've seen among students from these programs?
Anytime we give them the opportunity to do their own thing, especially in writing, whether it's writing a rap or writing a poem, it's always the most creative moment. I have my kids when we do one-on-ones when I meet with them, and they're wanting to share with me what they wrote. Sometimes I actually push on them in that area when I know they can write. To kind of inform and be therapeutic for them. I'll tell a quick one. I had a kid recently who was with us who had overdosed twice. And thankfully made it to this point. And I asked him, I said, I know you're a writer. I want you to write a letter to your mom. And I said, in this letter, I want you to write, if she had found this letter and you weren't here. This young man took him 2 weeks to get the first letter out, words out. And he came back to me, he said, I don't know how to start it. And I said, Mom, I'm sorry you had to find me like this. And before I knew it, 2 weeks later, when I came back to talk with him, this letter literally, as he read it to me, I had to fight back from tears, but it was so therapeutic for him. A letter he would never give his mother, but for him to be able to deal with those things that he was so grateful and thankful from his mom for what she had done for him. So the arts has so much power. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I think those are the stories that people need to hear, right? Truly give you that perspective of how these programs truly impact students. And so, we're running in the interest of time. Let's jump down to our closing question. And so, what are examples of resources and supports available to students transitioning out of facilities to continue their access to these arts experiences? And Tiffany, Michael, Leslie, Kedin, anyone could jump in here, wrap us up.
I'll start out. I think some of the resources are very natural, whether it's community centers for our young people, the Y, just natural supports in the community. There are a lot of free resources that are out there, but also like churches. We got kids who play instruments, and there are churches that are like, if we could just find somebody to play the drums, or we can find somebody to do this. And so just opening those avenues, making calls for them, and connecting those resources. Sometimes we think it takes a lot of money, and sometimes it does, but often there are a lot of free resources right around us.
And I can jump in here with one example of something that we were able to do at Sound Impact. We met a student through one of our residencies in 2023. It was a very talented poet. And he was a part of our residency. We worked with him 2 times. And then when he was out, we were able to invite him to perform with us in a separate program, pay him for his performance. And it was such an incredible opportunity for us to collaborate with him. He wrote this brand new piece, and it was just amazing to see. But there are challenges that come with that. Keeping the relationship going is challenging. But we're working on ways to see how we can continue to support the young people when they're out, because we would love to collaborate with them. And so we're talking to other partners about this too, but there's so much potential there.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning journey. Absolutely, Tiffany. Thank you for that. All right, y'all. So any last thoughts from our panelists? Leslie, Kedin, any last thoughts from you ladies as we close out?
I just want to thank all the panelists for just such interesting, wonderful information. I feel really inspired by all of you, so thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. Yes,
Echo
thank
that.
you to our panelists. Shout out to our panelists
Yeah.
for doing your amazing work, sharing your passion in this space. Shout out to our ASL interpreters and our organizers today. And I'm going to pass it back to Lizzie to close us out, I believe.
Well, thank you, everyone. That was incredibly insightful. And like Daizha said, we appreciate the work that you all are doing. It's so critical. And thank you for sharing with us today. Again, thank you, Heather and Stephanie, our wonderful and lovely ASL interpreters. And lastly, I'd like to thank our colleagues at the Mid-Atlantic Arts Ed Working Group for their support in making this webinar happen, and to our hero, Samantha Clark, who really helped out with a lot of the logistics for this session. So round of applause. Thank you all. I'm going to pass it over to Lizzie.
Yeah, I'd like to just thank you, the echoes. This was such a wonderful webinar. I really enjoyed the webinar and listening to all of our presenters just share. So just thank you so much for doing this, for your time today, and to our audience for also being with us in this space this afternoon. We are putting a survey link into the chat box. This is the first time that we are putting together this virtual session in this particular format. So we really would appreciate your feedback on this session. Over the next few minutes, we'll leave the room open so people can use that survey link in the chat box. The survey is brief and it should only take a few minutes. But again, your feedback is so valuable for us and what we want to provide for our audience in the future. So thanks again for joining us today. And once again, thank you to our presenters for sharing their knowledge and their time. We really appreciate you all.
Bye-bye.